Hey, I'm back. This is Chandler for Melda Production, and today I'm going to go over a song I released last week. So if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. I'll leave a little card at the top you can click. But I know before people told me that they wanted to see some, Melda plugins in action. So they wanted to see them in actual pieces of music and not me just, doing like sound design or messing around with it and demonstrating it. So here's an actual song. So let's get started. I'm not going to show everything today. I'm just going to show the piano and the guitar stuff today, and I'll show the other stuff in a separate video because it'll take too long. So this one in just part one, I'll show this, and let's start with the piano. So if you're not familiar, this piano I believe was just released. So yeah, here we go. This is the Monastery Grand Piano. So if you have MSoundfactory, just go to the Melda website and you can download it from there. It's a huge, multi-sampled, great sounding piano and everything, but I'll let you hear it here raw. I didn't do too much programming here. I didn't, I'm not a pianist, so I just programmed this in here and there's not too much variation, but you can hear the basic sound here. So I like that basic sound, but I wanted to do some other stuff to it. So I use this with pop preset here that's in here. So it has a few in there. And you can see what's going on with the effects already added. But I thought I wanted a little bit more. So I actually used MTurboCompressor here using the Meve model. And I'm compressing it a little bit just to get a little bit more like punch out of it. I'll let you hear that. So that's bringing out like that initial transient which I wanted, and it just sounds a little bit louder, but that's not really the point. But the next plugin I used here was actually this. So I used MAutodynamicEQ, and if you see it now, you see this is one of the devices in MAutodynamicEQ that I really, really love. So this is a tilt EQ, and if you're wondering what it does, at least on this setting, the tilt setting, it's going to add a low shelf and a high shelf. An opposite. I'm not even sure if this is really a shelf, but you see what it does. It's tilting it so the lows are cut a bit and the highs are accentuated a bit. And I have a high pass filter on there also. So I'll let you hear it first without. Now with. So I wanted just to cut a little bit more, so adding that there that really accentuates it sounds good to me. And another thing is I didn't want to get in the way of any of the bass stuff, and I generally just thought it sounded better like that. I really like this tilt EQ because I think this sounds natural. Just doing a little bit of cutting the lows and a little bit of boosting the highs, to me sounds better than just boosting the highs, a crazy amount. So I really like this one. It's very gentle, but it makes a big difference. And the last thing I did with the piano is I have reverb on here. So here in the bus, I am using the air chamber. I believe it's just this medium hall preset. It sounds really good to me. It adds like lots of space, not only depth but also width, which I really wanted. So that sounds good. But let's move on. Now let's do the verse guitar right here. So I'll solo this. Let me turn all this stuff off for now so you can hear it just as it is. So I actually used S-Gear. I think it's one of the only plugins I use that's not Melda. And I used this preset. I turned off the reverb and the delay. I'm using this, so really kind of like a low medium gain amp, and I'm using almost like a Mesa Boogie style speaker using a ribbon mic as the impulse response here. So I'll let you hear it with nothing on it. So that's okay, but it sounds a little bit boxy. And what I used is that same autodynamic EQ in here, and I'm tilting it up the same way. So this is before, on. So that made it a little bit brighter, and I needed that to kind of cut through the mix. Also, another thing is, oftentimes I like to start with this, and then if I notice something else, I can just go into the edit screen, and you see I just dip this out because this kind of resonance sounded bad to me. So that's another small tip you can use. Start with the devices, and then if you feel you need something else, just go in the edit screen and do a little bit more. The other thing I did was I added this MTurboComp, and this is just to make it I don't know, a little bit more even in the dynamics, because this isn't really distorted, so it kind of needs that just so it doesn't get lost in some phrases like this. So you see I'm doing quite a bit of compression in some cases, maybe 6-7 decibels. So not super extreme, but I'm kind of doing a lot. And from there, all I'm doing is I'm going into a short delay bus. I'm using MTurboDelay here. Let me make this a little bit smaller. And I'm using 16th notes. I have a good number of repeats. I think maybe like 2 or 3. And I'm using the width here just to make it wider. And all I want this to do is I want to give it like almost like a short slapback, but a stereo slapback, so it sounds almost like a room. I'm using the depth here, and when you use depth with these short delay times, it almost sounds like a chorus, but not as chorusy, which I think is good. And I just have a little bit of drive on there, and I'm turning down the low and highs, this, and so I'll let you hear this with this off, and then I'll turn it on. So you hear it's just louder. It's not really like doesn't have lots of repeats. It's just wider. I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't have said louder. It's more wider, I should say, and a little bit gives it a little bit of depth. That's all I wanted. Next here we have the long delay. So this is almost the same thing. I used MDelay MB. I don't even know why I did that, but I did. And so I'm using the low pass here. I'm cutting off the high end so it's not so prominent. I just want you to kind of feel it and not hear it. I'm using eighth note, so it's a little bit longer and it has more feedback. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm offsetting it to the right so it has a wider stereo image. So let's hear it with both of those delays on. So even though these are delays, they almost sound like a reverb. They're not like the obvious delay and the repeats you usually get. And I'm also sending these into the reverb, which gives it more space and a bit more width, like this. And last but not least, I'm using this delay throw bus. So I'm using MTurboDelay again. I'm using the exact same BBD. And what I'm doing here is cutting off the lows, highs, exactly the same thing. I have a little bit of vibrato there, but this time I'm using quarter notes and I have longer repeats. But the most important thing is I'm using the ducking, and that's why I'm calling this a delay throw. Usually you automate those, but I was lazy here. And one thing you can do is use this and use the ducking, and that way at the end of phrases when you're not playing, it's going to accentuate that delay so you can hear it, but while I'm playing, it's going to suppress the level so it's not as prominent. So it almost sounds like a delay throw, but I don't have to automate it, so I can be lazy. Like this. So you can hear that. There's some points where you can hear the long delay, and there's other points where you don't really hear that, and that's what I wanted. So I did that in the verse, and I did that with lots of the other things also. Oh, turn that off. I don't know why that was playing. But anyways, so I have that. Next part I should do, I guess I'll do the chorus. I could do the solo here also and show you this, but this is the exact same thing. I think I used almost the exact same presets for this also. I used the MSLE for this for the compression, but you can hear the solo guitar like this. I'm using the same short delay. I'm using a reverb on this instead of the longer delay, and I'm using a delay throw bus. So let's play it. So there you can actually hear the delay throw a little bit more prominently. You can see exactly what it's doing. Like while I was playing, you don't really hear it, but then when it gets to the end of the phrase, you can really hear that, like, oh, there's a delay there, which is exactly what I wanted. The next one I'll show is, I guess I'll show the verse, or no, I should do the chorus guitars here. So for the chorus, I actually used 2 S gears because I was trying to find the correct sound. Let me turn all these off first so you can hear what I'm doing. So I actually did almost the exact same thing for this, except I'm using a completely different tone. So this I used like a high gain amp, and I'm using like a 4x12 cab, and it sounds, I don't know, I didn't really like the sound at first, so I'll let you hear it. So it's really high gain, but to me it sounds a little bit small. So I was messing around with different combinations of amps and IRs, but then I decided, let me just stick with this and let me get in there and actually, manipulate it with some effects and see if that'll fix it. And I think it sounded better. So I used the MAutodynamicEQ, and I just wanted to change the sound to kind of get a little bit more cut out of it, like this. It is a little bit louder, I admit that, but I also turned up the high end, so that's what I'm doing there. In MTurboComp, same thing, I just compressing this. I just want to make sure all the details and things come out, but the big thing I did here was I used Double Tracker, and what I did with this is I use this to spread it and give it more stereo width, and it also kind of pushes it in the background. I find oftentimes when you add more stereo width, it pushes things into the track so it doesn't stand out too much. And of course, I wanted the high end to come out, but I don't want it to sit on top of the track. I want it to sit in the track. So I use this. So for those that don't know, what this does is it has 2 delayed signals, and one's pitch shifted up and one's pitch shifted down. I'm only using it at 32, but you can hear what's happening very obviously, like this. So it's very obvious what's happening, and then I have the other delays and reverbs and things like before, the short delay, long delay, reverb, and the delay throw. I'm using everything. Kitchen sink. Here we go. And so in the context of the song, I think it blended in well. Although you'll be the judge of that, I'm sure. Next, actually, probably the last one, actually, is this, the backwards guitar. So all I did was I recorded my guitars backwards, or actually I recorded them correctly, and then I turned it backwards in the DAW. And then I'm just using S gear here. I think it's almost the exact same preset as I used in the beginning. And this time I kept the reverb and delay on for some reason. I don't know why I did, but I'll let you hear it. Solo it. Okay, so I have all the reverb. Actually, I just have the reverb on that. But the other thing I did is I used MXXX, and that was to create a really interesting, I guess, delay. So I'm going to the comp, and I did that to bring out some of the low-end details. So I did another video on this using upwards compression here. So that brings in some of the lower-end details that I might have missed before. Here I'm using a delay in eighth notes and triplets. Of course, I'm letting some of the dry signal through, or all the dry signal through actually. And I'm also cutting off some of the high end and low end because I want it to be prominent, but not too prominent. And then the interesting part here is the auto pan. So I have from about 1,000 kilohertz down, it's using one auto pan here at one speed, like this, I guess in half notes. And above 1K, it's also in half notes, although I think I have the phase. This one is at 0 and this one starts at 90. So they're actually the same speed, but they're in different phases. So I'll let you hear what this sounds like. So it kind of has that eerie setting, and of course once I add the other things like reverb, etc., it gets even wider and wilder. So there you go. That is the piano and the guitars for this song. Next time I'll go over all the synths. As you can see, all the synths are actually MSoundfactory. One of the reasons I wanted to do this was, one, I had lots of free time on my hands because of everything that's going on in the world. Two, I wanted to see if I could combine like electronic elements with guitars and guitar elements. And the last reason is I want to see if I could actually create a whole song just using MSoundfactory. So MSoundfactory doesn't have a ton of devices yet, but I wanted to see, can I actually do it? And I was able to. So I'll show you what I used and how I used them next time. But if you like this, give me a thumbs up. If you have a question, leave that down below. Subscribe if you haven't done that, and check out all the other plugins at meldaproduction.com. Till next time, see you.